Did you know that the FIA has decided to nip one of the biggest secret weapons of F1 teams in the bud? Yes, flexible wings are in the crosshairs, and their ban is going to change the whole outlook for the 2025 season. Before I explain how this will affect Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren, tell me in the comments. Do you think this rule is fair, or is it just another way to benefit certain teams? Because what's coming could define who wins the next championship. Who do you think will be most affected by this measure? Why has the FIA banned flexible wings? For years, Formula One teams have looked for ways to improve the aerodynamic performance of their cars. One of the most effective solutions has been the use of flexible wings, structures designed to subtly change their shape under aerodynamic load. This allows for a perfect balance between grip in slow corners and speed on straights, giving a key advantage in every race. However, the FIA has decided to put an end to this technology with stricter regulations that will come into force from the 2025 Spanish GP. The main reason is that this flexibility has been used to gain advantages outside the spirit of the regulations, generating controversy and complaints from rival teams. Now, what has changed for the FIA to make this decision? This is not a new issue in F1. Over the years, wing flexibility has been the subject of numerous investigations and restrictions. Every time a team manages to optimize this concept, rivals demand that new rules be imposed to avoid unfair advantages. In 2023, McLaren was the team that best took advantage of this technology, making the most of aeroelasticity, a term coined by Andrea Stella. Their flexible wings allowed them to find an ideal balance point, making their car more competitive without compromising stability. Other teams, such as Red Bull and Ferrari, tried to develop their own versions of this concept. But in the winter of 2024, the FIA had assured that it would not introduce changes to the regulations, so these teams invested huge resources in improving their designs under the existing rules. The unexpected turn came when the FIA changed its position and decided to tighten the bending tests, reducing the permitted limits. Red Bull was the most affected, as it had bet heavily on this route to regain the advantage lost to McLaren and Ferrari. From the 2025 Spanish GP, the tests will be more rigorous and the bending tolerances will be much lower. This means that the flexibility allowed in the front wings will be reduced from 15 mm to 10 mm. New load tests will be introduced in the pits to check the rigidity of the wings. More detailed control will be applied to aerodynamic designs to avoid tricks. The FIA will closely monitor the development of the teams to avoid new interpretations of the regulations. The FIA explained that it is committed to ensuring that bodywork flexibility is no longer a point of contention for the 2025 season. As part of this effort, they will increase the scope of rear wing testing from the start of the season, and additional front wing testing will be introduced from the Spanish GP. Originally, the FIA had no intention of changing the regulations. But after analyzing the cars at the end of the 2024 season, they realized that some teams were exploiting the limits more than intended. Rivals, especially Ferrari and Mercedes, put pressure on the FIA to review the issue, arguing that some teams were gaining excessive advantages thanks to aerodynamic flexibility. This pressure led the federation to revise Technical Directive 018, tightening the tests to prevent the concept of aeroelasticity from continuing to be decisive in competition. The FIA wants to ensure that all teams compete under the same rules, with no single aerodynamic concept defining the championship. Modifying the wings to comply with the new regulations will cost up to €600,000 per team. That budget can no longer be used for other developments. Some engineers believe that this restriction could have a minimal impact, as teams will find new ways to optimize aerodynamics within the regulations. In short, the ban on flexible wings is an attempt by the FIA to ensure a more balanced championship. However, this decision comes too late for teams such as Red Bull and Ferrari, who have already invested heavily in this technology. The ban on flexible wings will have a direct impact on the performance of Formula One teams, upsetting the balance of power on the grid. Some teams will be forced to modify their designs and strategies, while others could benefit from greater stability in the regulations. Red Bull is the team most affected by this decision. Since the end of 2023 and during the 2024 preseason, they had invested a considerable amount of resources in perfecting the flexibility of their front wing, trusting that the FIA would keep the regulations unchanged. This development allowed them to find a more efficient aerodynamic balance, optimizing the performance of the RB21 on different types of corners and straights. The ban forces them to rethink the entire concept of their car in the middle of the season, which means a loss of time, money, and a possible reduction in their competitive advantage. Ferrari is also affected, although to a lesser extent. They had been slow to adopt this concept due to uncertainty about the FIA's stance. Initially, their strategy was to wait for the regulatory body to intervene before developing their own version of the flexible wings. However, seeing that no restrictions were imposed, they finally implemented this system in Singapore, several months behind McLaren and Red Bull. Now that the FIA has changed its approach, all the work done in this direction will have to be reconsidered, which means another setback in their development. McLaren is one of the teams that could benefit from the new regulations. They were the pioneers in optimizing aeroelasticity within the limits of the regulations and managed to significantly improve their performance in 2023. Unlike Red Bull, their success did not depend exclusively on this concept, but was part of a more complete aerodynamic package. With the ban, the rest of the teams will have to make adjustments that could affect their competitiveness, while McLaren already has a solid base to maintain its level without the need for drastic changes. Mercedes could be another of the favored teams. In recent years, they have struggled to optimize the aerodynamics of their cars, especially with the generation of ground effect cars. Their problems with balance and stability in high-speed corners have kept them behind Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren. However, with the removal of the flexible wings, the aerodynamic gap between the teams could be reduced, giving them the opportunity to close the gap and improve their competitiveness in the fight for podiums and wins. Another key aspect is the financial impact of the new regulations. Adapting the wings to comply with the FIA restrictions will represent a considerable expense for the teams, estimated at around €600,000. This directly affects the budget available for other developments throughout the season, which can influence the progress of aerodynamic and mechanical improvements. For teams with greater financial capacity, such as Red Bull and Mercedes, this is a manageable obstacle, but for others with less room for investment, it could become a significant limitation. A level playing field is one of the FIA's aims with this measure, but the real effect will depend on the ability of each team to adapt. Those that have based much of their performance on aerodynamic flexibility will face greater difficulties, while those with more balanced approaches will be able to take the opportunity to consolidate their position on the grid. With this decision, the fight for the 2025 championship could be altered before the season even reaches its halfway point. The FIA's decision to ban flexible wings will have a significant economic and technical impact on Formula One teams, especially those that have based part of their aerodynamic development on this technology. The implementation of this regulation will force teams to modify designs that were already in an advanced stage, which entails considerable expenditure on research, development, and manufacturing of new components. The estimated cost of adapting the front and rear wings to the new regulations is around €600,000 per team. This figure not only represents an unexpected additional investment, but also directly affects the budget planning of the teams, which operate under a cost cap imposed by the FIA. For teams with greater financial resources, such as Red Bull, Mercedes, or Ferrari, this expense can be assumed without compromising other areas of development. However, for teams with less room for maneuver, such as Williams, Haas, or Alfa Romeo, this investment may mean the cancellation or delay of other improvements scheduled for the rest of the season. The budget cap, introduced in 2021, was designed to balance the competition and prevent teams with greater resources from gaining a disproportionate advantage in the development of their cars. However, each regulatory change that requires a technical adjustment of this magnitude generates an unequal impact on the grid. While some teams can absorb the cost without affecting their overall performance, others must make strategic decisions about where to allocate their resources, which could influence their performance throughout the year. Beyond the financial impact, the technical challenge of adapting the cars to the new regulations is equally complex. The flexibility of the wings has been a key tool in optimizing the aerodynamic behavior of the cars in different track conditions. Limiting this capacity will force engineers to find new solutions to maintain the balance between straight-line speed and downforce in corners. The main challenge lies in redesigning the wings without compromising the stability and efficiency of the car. To achieve this, teams will have to invest time in computational fluid dynamic simulations and wind tunnel testing, which means additional consumption of resources and development hours. In addition, any change in aerodynamics affects other areas of the car, such as suspension and weight distribution, which could require additional adjustments to maintain optimal performance. Another factor to consider is the time of implementation. The regulations will come into force at the 2025 Spanish GP, meaning teams must work against the clock to design, manufacture, and test new wings before then. Developing a new aerodynamic part not only involves adjustments to the design, but also to the materials used and the manufacturing process to ensure they meet the stiffness requirements imposed by the FIA. The static load test that will be applied from the new regulations will be stricter, reducing the allowed flex in the front wings from 15 mm to 10 mm. This means that teams will have to use stiffer materials or modify the arrangement of carbon fibers in the wing structure to comply with the regulation. However, increasing the stiffness of the wings can have negative effects on the stability of the car, so a balance will need to be found that does not compromise the overall performance of the car. The impact of this measure will also be reflected in the competitiveness of the grid. Teams that had built their performance around aerodynamic flexibility could lose some of their advantage, while those that had not opted for this concept may benefit from not being forced to make drastic modifications to their cars. The ability to adapt will be key to determining who manages to minimize losses and who suffers most from the restriction imposed by the FIA. In a sport where every millisecond counts, any change in regulations can upset the balance of power between teams. The ban on flexible wings will force everyone to rethink their aerodynamic approach, but those who manage to find alternative solutions efficiently will be the ones who remain competitive in the fight for the championship. The FIA's decision to ban flexible wings will mark a turning point in the evolution of Formula One. These types of regulations have historically been a point of friction between teams and the governing body, as there is always debate about whether greater equity is really being sought or whether it is a response to pressure from certain teams seeking to level the competition in their favor. With this regulation, the development strategies of the teams will be altered. Red Bull, which had bet heavily on this technology to maintain its dominance, will have to rethink part of its aerodynamic philosophy. Ferrari, which joined this trend late, will also have to make adjustments to its car at a key moment of the season. On the other hand, teams such as McLaren and Mercedes could benefit from seeing how their main rivals face difficulties in adapting to the new demands. Beyond the technical implications, the big question is how this will affect performance on the track. Formula One has shown on multiple occasions that teams find solutions within the regulations to compensate for any loss of performance. The key will be which team manages to develop the best response to this restriction without compromising the overall balance of its car. This decision by the FIA also leaves the door open to future controversies. It is not the first time that a regulation has been implemented in the middle of the season with the aim of limiting a technical advantage, and probably, it will not be the last. The constant evolution of F1 means that teams are always looking for ways to innovate within the rules, which means that new concepts will emerge in the future that could once again be in the FIA's sights. The real impact of this measure will only be seen when the teams present their adaptations and the cars return to the track. Until then, the question remains as to whether this regulation will really balance the competition or if it will simply change who has the advantage on the grid. Formula One is a sport in which every detail counts, and decisions like this can alter the course of a season. The fight for the 2025 championship is underway, and this change in regulations could be the factor that defines who remains at the top and who will have to fight to regain their performance. Will this measure really make F1 fairer, or will it only change which teams have the advantage? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if you want to closely follow how these regulations impact the season, subscribe to the channel. In the next video we will analyze another key decision by the FIA that could influence the title fight.